The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the city streets into a blur of neon reflections and glistening asphalt. Clara gripped the steering wheel of her vintage convertible tightly, her knuckles whitening as her mind churned with frustration. The deal she had spent months negotiating had collapsed in a single, humiliating phone call. She had always been in control, always one step ahead. But tonight, the universe had decided to remind her that even the sharpest claws could slip. Her dark hair clung to her face, wet from the rain, and she barely noticed as the wind whipped through the open-top car. She accelerated, weaving through the traffic with reckless abandon, desperate to escape the feeling of failure that gnawed at her. Clara had built a reputation as someone who never lost, someone untouchable, yet tonight she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. As she rounded a corner, the tires squealed on the slick pavement, and she nearly collided with a small, inconspicuous garage tucked between two towering skyscrapers. The flickering neon sign above the door read simply, "Marcus's Auto Repair." Clara slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly before coming to a halt. She cursed under her breath, her heart racing not just from the near crash, but from the sudden, inexplicable pull she felt toward the shop. She hesitated, staring at the dimly lit garage. It seemed out of place in the city of steel and glass, a hidden relic from another time. A warm amber light spilled from the open doorway, illuminating the rain-soaked sidewalk. Clara didn't know why, but she felt compelled to step inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered. The smell hit her immediately, motor oil, hot metal, and something faintly sweet like coffee or old wood. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 30s. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they had been shaped by years of hard work. His dark hair was tousled, streaked with grey at the temples, and his eyes, a deep shade of brown, met hers with calm, unflinching attention. "You're lucky you made it here before the engine blew," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying no judgment. He wore a grease-stained shirt rolled up at the sleeves and worn jeans, and there was an effortless confidence in the way he moved. Clara opened her mouth to snap a reply, to assert her usual authority, but somehow the words faltered. Instead, she crossed her arms, shivering slightly in the damp air. "I don't have time for this," she said sharply, brushing past him. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her so casually, without fear or deference. Marcus simply nodded and went to work, crouching by her car with practiced ease. He didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just began dismantling parts of the engine, his hands moving with a rhythm that seemed almost meditative. Clara stood there, unsure why she hadn't left yet, watching him with a mixture of impatience and fascination. Minutes stretched into an hour, and the rain outside showed no sign of stopping. Clara found herself drawn into the quiet intensity of the garage. She noticed the small details, the way Marcus's brow furrowed in concentration, the subtle smile that played at the corner of his lips when something went right, the way his fingers moved with both strength and precision. There was a patience in him that she had never encountered in the high-powered world she inhabited, a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of her own life. "You shouldn't be out in this storm," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. He didn't look up from the engine, but his voice carried a gentle concern that made Clara's chest tighten. "I'm fine," she said quickly, a defensive edge in her tone. "Really?" But even as she said it, she felt the lie pressing against her. She wasn't fine. She was exhausted, frustrated, and more alone than she had been in years. Marcus paused, finally standing and wiping his hands on a rag. He leaned against the car, studying her with a quiet intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said softly. "Sometimes letting someone help doesn't make you weak." Clara's first instinct was to scoff, to retreat behind the armor she had built so carefully. But something in his tone, in the way he said it without judgment or expectation, made her hesitate. She didn't understand why his words affected her so deeply, why she felt a strange warmth creeping into the cold corners of her heart. The rain continued to fall, a rhythmic backdrop to the silence that settled between them. Clara found herself studying Marcus, noticing the lines etched into his face from years of work and life, the kind of hands that could build or fix anything, and the depth in his eyes that seemed to understand more than he let on. Hours passed. Clara, who was usually impatient to leave anywhere she went, found herself rooted to the spot, watching as Marcus brought her car back to life. The engine roared smoothly, a testament to his skill, but more than that, it was a metaphor for something awakening inside her, something she had long suppressed: trust, vulnerability, and perhaps even hope. When Marcus handed her the keys, there was a softness in his gaze that made her heart skip a beat. "It's ready," he said simply. "Go on, drive safely." Clara felt a strange reluctance to leave. She had come in here expecting nothing more than a quick repair, but she was leaving with something intangible, something she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not just for her ambition, her anger, or her success, but for the person she truly was beneath the carefully constructed exterior. She started the car, the engine purring beneath her like a living thing, and glanced back at Marcus. He gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had formed in the quiet, rain-soaked garage. Clara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. As she drove out into the city streets, the rain began to ease, leaving the pavement glistening under the glow of the streetlights. Clara inhaled deeply, the cold air filling her lungs, and allowed herself a small, tentative smile. The world outside was still chaotic, still unforgiving, but somewhere in the midst of it all, she had found a sanctuary, a reminder that even the coldest hearts could be touched by kindness. Tonight, she had discovered that she didn't have to face everything alone, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could learn to let someone in. And with that thought lingering, Clara drove through the city, the rain washing away, not just the dirt from the streets, but a small piece of the armor she had worn for so long. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. The city streets were glistening after the storm, slick with rain and reflecting the kaleidoscope of neon lights. Clara drove through the night, her hands still gripping the steering wheel tightly, but her mind was no longer racing with frustration. Instead, it replayed the image of Marcus standing in his garage, the calm in his eyes, the quiet strength in his hands, the warmth that had seeped into her chest despite herself. She had expected efficiency from him, perhaps a polite nod and a receipt for the repair. But what she hadn't expected was him, the man who seemed to understand her without her saying a word, the man whose presence had unsettled her in a way she couldn't yet name. For the first time in years, Clara felt a strange sense of hesitation, a willingness to slow down, to breathe, to let someone in. She didn't understand why this simple interaction had stirred something so profound, but she didn't fight it. She let it exist, fragile and tender, like the first fragile bud of spring pushing through winter frost. The next morning, Clara's world resumed its usual rhythm: emails, calls, meetings, and the constant pressure to stay ahead. But beneath the surface, her thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus. She wondered what he was doing right now, whether he thought of her at all, and if she would see him again. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Her car began making a subtle, troubling noise during a routine check, and she reluctantly called Marcus's garage. The voice on the other end was the same calm, grounding presence she remembered. "Bring it in," he said simply. "I'll take care of it." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Something inside her told her this wasn't just about the car. It was about her, too. When she arrived at the garage, Marcus was waiting outside, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw her. Clara felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't expected. There was a quiet understanding between them now. a shared acknowledgement of the unspoken bond forming between them. Morning